Recommended draft policy, ARIN-2018-5, disallow third-party organizational record creation. So this was a policy proposal in October of 2018. They adopted it the following month as a draft policy. So draft policies, let me talk about that. Proposals are things that you guys have an idea, you send us a proposal. It defines a problem, might suggest some text. When the AC says, yeah, that is an actual understandable problem, they may not agree with your problem, but they understand it's something to do with the number resource manual and it has a fairly cohesive statement of what you're trying to fix, then they'll adopt it and it becomes a draft policy. At that point, it's under ARIN Advisory Council control, and they watch the postings on the mailing list, they take input from everyone, and use that to revise it based on community feedback. So this became a draft policy in November. Based on feedback, it was revised a few times, and ended up, the last revision was February 4th of this year. It was recommended for adoption in 2016, March 2000, I'm sorry, wow. 26th of March, 2019. So that means that the AC has found it meets the criteria necessary for a good policy. That means that it has a clear problem, it has a, it's technically sound, it is something that is supported by the community. They're going to confirm that at this meeting, so that's why we're going through this. So, this is the first time being presented. If it has support from the community at this meeting, it could actually, as a recommended draft policy, it could be sent to the board to be ratified and put in the number resource policy manual. So, staff and legal review. 2018-5 requires that only an authorized contact that is verified by ARIN be allowed to create a new organization record. The request must be submitted directly to ARIN by the organized contact, and no third party should be allowed to create organization records on behalf of the new organization. This means that organizations wishing to reallocate, reassign address space to their customers must coordinate with the customer to ensure that they've created an org ID first. We'll need to ensure that no matter what method used to reallocate a sign, the org ID will be verified prior to creation. Will have an impact on registration services as there'll be more organizations created, therefore more questions, more tickets. These changes will result in more accurate information. The development for system changes is about 4 weeks. It can be implemented as written. There's no material risk to this policy. Resource impact, medium resource. It can be implemented probably 3 months after ratification by the ARIN board. It changes the guidelines, procedures, our documentation on the website. There's an additional workload to RSD for processing org create tickets that we anticipate. Medium level of engineering efforts required. So that concludes my introduction to it. I'll now have Andrew come up and give the ARIN AC presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you all had a good lunch. So let's jump right into org IDs. All right, so what is an org ID? Was it a strange creature? Something else? Maybe this is an org ID? No, this isn't an org ID. This is actually a hoary marmot that I found in Mount Rainier National Park. Anyway, let's get on to org IDs. All right, organizational record is actually an org ID. It's basically a top-level database record that we have in the ARIN database that defines an organization. I kind of have a sample one here on this slide. Bob's Bait and Sushi just down the street here on Waterfront Road. And most of the time, org records are referred to by IPv4 and IPv6 blocks, ASNs, and they also have point of contact records associated with them. All right, so how do we create an org ID today? Well, you can do it in ARIN Online. You can still do it via an email template, and there's 3 different templates, or actually there's 5 different templates you can do it with, right? So an org template, reassign detailed, either V6 or V4, or a reallocation template. And you can also do it via Reg RWS, which is the API instance into the ARIN database. So there's many different ways we can create the org ID today. So this is the long problem statement. I won't read it to you. It's also in your packet for those of you who have it or on the website. Basically, the premise of the issue is that The way that we create org IDs today creates a whole bunch of database cruft. When people create reassignment records, they basically often just add an additional org record just because it's easier rather than assigning it to an additional one. And we want to stop that practice so that we have organization records that actually represent real organizations that exist in the world. All right, so how are we going to do this? This is the text that's going to be changed. It basically adds a little section that says that we're only going to create organization records from authorized contacts representing that specific entity. So if you're a ISP, that means that, and you're going to reassign a record to someone else, it means that someone else has to come to ARIN and create an org record for you to create a reassignment or reallocation record for that specific organization. All right, so what's the effect of this change? I kind of already highlighted this a little bit. The authorized representative has to be verified by ARIN, and they are the only ones that create an org ID. And ISPs have to get the organization themselves to start with ARIN first before a reallocation or reassignment record can be created. So what are the outcomes that we hope to have from this? We hope to reduce the number of org IDs in the database overall and make them more accurate because they actually represent records that are created by organizations rather than alternate records that are created by ISPs. So the discussion points, do you support this policy change? And specifically, if you're a large or other ISP that makes a number of reassignment records or reallocation records, we want to hear from you on this. Just like the POC change that we discussed about earlier today, this could be a significant impact on your workflow, and we want to make sure that we're taking that into account as we make this change and make sure that we have a correct timeline for implementation that'll meet with many of the organizations around our region. And do you have any issues or questions about the implementation or any other suggested changes? One comment about that had come up on the list since we made the slide deck is a clarification to make sure that people who are acting as contractors for small organizations are able to continue to make those records. And so any comments about that, what would constitute an authorized contact? We'd like to hear from you in the room on that discussion. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. Microphones are open. Recommended draft policy, same drill. I know food always slows down a bit, but I'm sure that somebody will approach the microphone quickly. Someone might want to even be Kevin. His nemesis is approaching the mic. Front microphone.
Owen DeLong, ARIN AC. I don't think I'm Kevin's nemesis,
For getting to the mic first.
but he had a clear advantage earlier. I don't know what he did. Anyway, regarding the policy proposal, I support it as written. I think that this is an important problem to solve. In my previous employ, I spent a great deal of time tracking down and eradicating org records and POC records and all kinds of other records that were created on our behalf erroneously by various contractors that random person in the company had contracted with, and they had just sort of put information in there that felt good. And this led to much badness. So this is a definite needed thing, and I hope it will move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hi, this is Louis Lee. This is Louis' hood.
Tell us, what happened to Louis' hat?
Find me at the social. I'm with Google Fiber and also on the NRO-NC. And in my previous job, I was at an IX operator who operated a small transit service. And in doing so, our transit service is PGP based and required our customers to obtain an AS number, many of whom did not have AS numbers previously. I'm telling you all this because It was not that much of a burden to help them create an org ID. It was a matter of walking them through the application, the form, and let them know, go ahead and come back to me if they have issues. So if they really needed an org ID, it's fairly simple to have even a form that's partially filled with my information that I need them to have. However, I'm interested to hear from anybody that operates an ISP that have large numbers of customers who they really want org IDs for. I had only a small number, but the work per customer was not that big.
But are you in favor or against there? No, hold on.
So I am in favor.
Thank you.
So this is John Sweeting with ARIN. I'm neither here nor there on the policy.
As we'd expect, yes.
As would be expected. I just want to say that's what Louis just said is very good, but also if there's ISPs that want their customers to create org IDs and they don't want to spend the time with them, there's a help desk number that they can call and we will walk them through it. We can, as of now, even generate the tickets for them and give it to them to resubmit to us. So that's all there and good.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Kevin Bloomberg, The Wire. On the online stuff and the manual processing and the using the help desk, this is all easy peasy stuff, and I absolutely support it. But if we look at this morning and the impact to the API, this would, to me, completely destroy the use of the API for creating org IDs because you'd have to have an org ID created in the first place. I don't understand the severity of the impact, and that wasn't really determined here by staff. What is the severity of the impact to the API? Because ultimately, that's the group that's going to have the biggest issue if this policy, to my mind, is implemented. So what is the scenario in terms of the breakage when this is now disallowed through the API?
So it's a good question because obviously automation might be tricky, but Andrew says he can.
So I think what would happen, and I think there's also a question for staff and how the implementation would work, but my suggestion is that create from a reg RWS would no longer be permitted inside that system. I would still expect that modify and delete would be available because there are other fields that you might want to change without directly interacting with ARIN via a ticket. But if there are other folks who use that reg RDBS more than I do, that would be good information to know.
John.
Create is not a very popular call today because it requires work to process in any case. You're talking about a circumstance where organizations that we have right now end up with orgs that are created indirectly, and that's a different creature, okay? Your question is, how does the API change? Unlikely the API will change. It's more likely you're going to end up with a ticket that has to be manually covered in order to provide the documentation to confirm you're an authorized contact. And I don't expect a lot of the automatic people will bother to do that because they don't have the documentation and they're not the valid contact. Eventually the request will be closed out. So you're trying to distinguish two different things. If you want to know about the API, we'll look at what happens to the API. It's quite likely it'll become very rarely used. That doesn't mean you delete it. It just means it becomes very rarely used. The different question is, what about organizations right now who want to create orgs on behalf of their detailed reassignments? They can't. And that impact is the same whether they're using the RESTful interfaces or not.
So you're saying, John, that currently the create API would be automatic, but under this, it would now go for manual processing?
It would require a verification of an authorized contact, which means it's going to be manual.
So the flip side to this policy, and again, I am in support of it, but the flip side to the policy is that in preventing erroneous records, we are more than likely going to prevent legitimate records because it becomes complex and therefore orgs are just going to turn it off. Would that be a fair statement?
If you believe that the records that have been created historically are authorized, historically, they've all been, quote, authorized, even though they're created by another org, then you'll be losing those authorized records that would have been created, yes. If you believe that most of the records that have been created are not authorized by the organization they're being created on behalf, then that's what you're losing. You're going to lose a mix of, you're going to lose org records that would have been automatically created. The question is, how many of those that were being created would have actually been qualified by the org that they were created on behalf of? It's a very, 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 very small number.
Does that address your question, Kevin?
Yeah, I would use accurate versus authorized, because if a record is accurate, I really don't care. It's accurate. That's all I care about as an end user. But I don't think that that's the case right now, and I think this is why the policy's there, is because most of the stuff is not accurate. It's wrongly placed, and the people that should have had a say, the authorized people in the first place, didn't get a say.
And if it is accurate, it's a transient event that changes over time to become less accurate, never more.
Okay, I think we're getting into a rabbit hole. I think there's
Thank you.
an
That answers my
identified,
question. Thank you.
question that the AC should probably at least address and work out with staff in that. Next
Michael
speaker.
Castoval, Noralo. I'm tentatively supportive of this policy as written, but I have concerns for companies that manage other companies' properties. For example, it is not uncommon for one company to completely manage all aspects of another customer's networks, IP allocations, so forth and so on. And this would create this currently can be an entirely transparent process, since organization 1 can create and manage all the R1 resources for organization 2. This would add some burden to that, and while it may be relatively straightforward to create an org ID, it may adversely impact those that act as a middleware for clients, especially those that are grabbing a bunch of IP blocks and releasing them because of demand scaling up and down. So I have I have concerns about this.
Well, luckily, the person behind you, I think, has experience in that, so I think he may have some feedback on that.
Owen DeLong, independent contractor and member of the ARIN-AC. Yeah, I've done a lot of the kind of contract work he's talking about. I've got a lot of clients as well. And we discussed this actually on the mailing list, and it was pointed out by ARIN staff that as written, the policy would be implemented such that if you are able to create the org ID with the proper documentation showing that the org in question has authorized you to do that on their behalf, you're fine. So you're going to need some form of documentation from your client that says, yeah, this guy's authorized to interact with ARIN on our behalf, but that should not be hard to obtain if you're legitimately operating with ARIN on their behalf. So I think it's actually a solved problem. I don't think that there's a need for changes to the policy text or acrobatics to address it.
The LOA returns. Front microphone.
Yeah, John Sweeting, Aaron again, and as Owen can attest, and anybody else that has created orgs for other organizations, we have worked with them. It's the current process. It's the way we do business today. There's really no change needed for that or required. We will verify that the organization has authorized him to do this for them, and then he's able to do it. And if he wants to be put on that record as a POC and they authorize it, he's put on the record as a POC and manages their record.
All right. We still have time in our slot for more speakers. However, we seem to have lost. Would anyone like to make a comment? Otherwise, we will close the microphones. Joe, anyone in the remote typing or? Oh, maybe. All right. No. Yes. Maybe. No. No. Maybe. No. Oh. All right. Closing microphones in 3, 2, 1. The microphones are closed. Please thank the Andrew Dull who's running away for his presentation. So again, this is a recommended draft policy as the former two before it, so we will ask now the question of support, similar to the last two. Counters in position, excellent. Those remote, please indicate whether or not you are in support of 2018-5 proceeding as written. And those in the room, or against, and those in the room, if you are in favor, please raise your hand now, nice and high. I know, after lunch, it's tired. Beach is not far. Oh, I see a wavering hand there in the middle. Come on, up just there we go. It's a little bit of exercise. Remember which hand you're using this time so you can alternate to the other one next time. Excellent, thank you. Please lower your hands. And those that are opposed to the policy as written proceeding, please raise your hand nice and high. On the matter of 2018-5, disallowed third-party organization record creation, the results are, perfect timing, 111 in the room and remote, 37 in favor, 1 against. Thank you for this. We'll move to the next policy.